Welcome to Crafting Generative Trading Systems. I'm Curtis White. My website is beyondbacktesting.com. Crafting Generative Trading Systems. I want to focus a minute on this word crafting because when we think about generated trading systems or generative trading systems, these are trading systems that are generated by a computer program, by software. And crafting is something that we think about when we're handcrafting strategies in easy language, for example. And my process, this presentation is going to be on my process that I use for using system generators to help me craft trading systems. And I really like to approach it much like I would the handcrafted strategies. And I'm going to show you that process and that methodology in this presentation. Now, you may ask, why am I sharing this? And it's a valid question. When I think about it, there are three reasons that caused me to want to put this together. Number one, these processes, these techniques I developed, I'm not the most organized person. And by sharing this information, it helps me to really solidify my methodology and make it my own. It's not just a collection of techniques I'm using. And I thought that was important in my trading, is to be more systematic and more methodological, so to speak. So that's number one, is by sharing, I can help to refine my processes. Number two is there is a community of us who use system generators, and there's a Discord chat, and this community has helped me with a lot of problems, a lot of the day-to-day, okay, how do you do this? And I do feel like I also have Twitter followers and other followers from on my mail list who follow me, who appreciate and value my work. And I feel like, yes, I should try to give back to create some value, right? To show that I demonstrate that I can create some value. And it's this idea of giving back and creating value for the community. There is a risk, and this is absolutely true. There's a risk of everything you share. You're giving potentially other traders an advantage, and trading is it's not easy. So there is a balance to that. And number three is I am going to be offering or potentially offering, depending on the level of interest, some more premium workshops going forward on these same concepts where I go into more detail, where I share more proprietary information. And these workshops will be between 1 and 3 workshops on various techniques related to this. And this is to also to help those traders who are trying to decide if those types of workshops would be interesting for them. This may help decide if that's something or not for those traders. So that was the 3 reasons I did this. Really, one was to give back not in any order, but we'll give back to the community, especially my people who follow me and want to get the value. 2 is to help myself really solidify my methodology and improve myself in my processes. And 3 is this idea that if there's interest, I may do a more detailed workshop on these processes for those traders who are interested. So let's get started. Trying to change the slide here. Okay, risk disclaimer. Futures trading is risk, or all trading is risky, really. Look over that risk disclaimer. I'm not really sure that it's required for this presentation because we're just talking about, we're not really talking about specific trading systems, but I wanted to be extra careful, so I always put the risk disclaimer up when I remember to. Trading is risky. Read over that. We're going to be talking about not any specific actual real performance. We're talking about hypothetical stuff here. Just keep that in mind. Okay. Generative systems, briefly defined. So, talk about these generative systems, right? What are these? These are programs that generate trading systems using algorithms or computation. Okay, it can be genetic algorithms, random permutation. Doesn't really matter if it's generating, putting together trading systems, then that's what we're talking about. Now, what are some of these programs? What are some of these system generators? And first, I want to say that because I list these programs together, does not in any way imply that these programs are equal to each other or they're in the same class. I know that every developer is very proud of their software, but reality is these are system generators, and for educational purposes, you need to know what's out there. You need to know, okay, what what's he talking about? So that's why I'm going to share these examples here. Now, again, I'm not saying any of these are on the same level. Some of them are different than others. I will share that I'm a licensed Build Alpha user, just like any other user. I don't have any special relationship with that developer, so to speak, but I'm just a licensed user of that software. I can share that it looks like Strategy Quant X has a lot of updates and things on it. I've been working on the trial and it looks interesting. All these programs have, I'm sure their respective followers. And I simply cannot say which one's the best or how they, and certainly not in this webinar, say this was good, better for this or that. I know NeuroShot has a long history. It's a little different from some of the others, but it has some of those similar capabilities. So each one is unique. Now, what I value in my software and what I require is the ability to control the process, to craft it. And I know some genetic builders or some system builders do not give me enough control, or at least, let's say I haven't learned to program enough to be able to do that. For me, it is critical that I can control that process. If a program just generates random strategies and I cannot, drive the process creatively, then it's of no use. Okay, and I think you'll see that as I go forward. So, in terms of, obviously there are technological components here with the type of algorithms and the how fast they generate systems, and lots of different components here. How many systems, what type of validation, how simple validation tests they have. But these are some of the ones that are more commonly known, and that's why I list them. And there are others as well. I know other software, getting that capability. But really, for what I look for is, I think as you go through this, you'll see what I look for, and then you can see if your generator has that or whatever. Let me say this: if you're one of these software developers and you believe your software has, it is unique and has, it would be worth for me to use it, then certainly come to me. Give me a copy of your software, and I'll be glad to see if I can use it in my work. And then if I do, I could be, if you would like, I'd be glad to show how I use it. I'm not opposed to that. It's just that nobody wants to give me anything. So, okay. So, the first thing we want to address is the arguments against using system generators. Okay. And these arguments typically come from developers who use I'm going to call it the traditional, the classical, the handcrafting method of developing trading systems, where you basically program the trading system, you program the rules in. Okay. And the reason I want to include these arguments is I think they have some validity. And so we need to be able to address these valid criticisms if we're going to do something a different way, right? So one of the arguments is random in, random out. Okay, there's no logic. Some of these system generators are combining things in ways they weren't meant to be combined. There may not be any logic, and sometimes sometimes the combinations can be, could be, we'll say even logically wrong, even constructed wrong. And I don't have a specific example of that off mine, but let's imagine a neural network that didn't normalize the prices, that's using a static range, okay, or for price, okay, and it's expected that price will stay in that range, right? That range that already exists. That's probably not going to be true going forward, right? And so once the price moves out of that range, then the predictions may be wrong, right? So that's the type of idea. Or let's imagine that calculations are being made in such a way that they don't make sense. Okay. Then there's a very related argument to this, is that we have to understand what statistical relevance or confidence testing means. And in science, in traditional statistics, usually a lot of times a lot of fields look at the 95% confidence level, right? And say, and that sounds like it's very significant. We found something that was at the 95% confidence level. But what that really means is that you would only expect to find that 5 times out of 100 by random chance. And obviously, if you're doing a couple studies, or you looked at, and this was a result of a couple different studies or one study, then that would be significant, because you only had basically a 5 out of 100 chance of, or 1 out of 1 out of 20 of that happening by pure chance. So it's very unlikely. Now, these system generators will generate thousands, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of systems. So whatever type of confidence level we put, what does it mean? And that's a very valid consideration. And then there's this idea of relevance and market cognition. And in my interview with, I believe it was Better System Trader podcast, I talked about market cognition, and I gave an example of why do some developers have better success. And my idea is that there is a difference in the quality of ideas that traders have. And some traders have better ideas. So if you start with a better idea, right, then it means it has a higher probability of working before you test it, before it's tested, okay? And really, that's what it's very similar to arguments that classical system developers have when they say, "Look, I observed this in the market, this phenomena. Yes, it could be chance, but I already observed it in the market, or I read something about it, so other traders may be using this. So there's some meaning to it, right? There's already some. There's the test. We're not testing we're creating the test, and we believe there's a meaning. So one way to think about this, and again, it's with the market cognition would be, let's say a trader, and this is a very trivial example, but let's say a trader who's new to development, doesn't understand limit orders or how they work, and creates a system that's a limit order system that's very optimistic, assumes everything gets filled. And a more experienced developer would know, okay, that's probably not likely to work with such optimistic assumptions, right? So before we test it, we know that, okay, unless they've coded for the field probability, it's probably not going to have good results. We don't need to test it. Okay, that's kind of that idea. That's actually the meta strategy cognition idea, which is very similar to the market cognition. But this idea, basically, there being an importance, an immense importance to the idea. So we need to address these criticisms, these valid criticisms. I think in my methodology to be comfortable using this. So first, I never want to run a system generator without an intention or a clear and specific goal. Okay, so this kind of addresses the criticism of not having any starting point or idea or intention to garbage in, garbage out. Right? We start with a goal. We start with an intention. And one of the strongest arguments for system trading is this idea of iterative improvement and tracking and so forth. And it's just so true that one of the other types of trading I do is discretionary scalping. And I like to read the tape. I can get a good feel for it, and I can often anticipate where the market's going on a short-term basis. But the reality is that when I take a discretionary trading idea or concept, there might be 2 or 3 elements to it. 1 or 2 might work. 1 or 2 might not work. You just don't know. And there's just no way to refine that. And so that's one of the biggest benefits of this idea of system trading is that you can refine it. And refining means it disperses through every level. So, for example, it could mean refining, exactly how we formulate the idea based on our back testing. It can mean refining. It also means going forward and then seeing that, okay, this type of system did not perform well, right? And the ability to do this with generative systems, if you just have a portfolio of 100 systems or 1,000 systems that got generated, you have no idea what what differentiates those systems. Let's imagine if a classical developer, right, and he's generated, let's say he's got all his systems categorized. He has some breakout systems. He has some mean reversion systems. If he's tracking those systems in the live, and all of a sudden all his breakout systems start performing worse, or the mean reversion systems are performing well, it gives him some insights of what's going on. But if you have 100 systems that don't have any type of categorization or meaning to them, if things quit working, you don't have really any way of improving it. Maybe this guy had a breakout system. This is something I will share. I can share this, and I'm very careful what I share with in terms of actual edge or whatever, because the trading is difficult. But one thing I've found is that when some of the edges I found, they'll start out working on a longer time frame, like 2 or 3 days. They'll work out for 2 or 3 days, and then as it gets discovered by hedge funds and other traders, that time frame will shorten. The period on that will shorten. The wavelength will shorten on that edge until it gets very short, right? And if you know that you're running an edge, and you know it's a specific type of edge, and you see that wavelength shortening, and this can also happen based on the market conditions too. More bullish environments often have shorter wavelengths. But if you see that happening, although let me say this, bearish markets can also have very short wavelengths depending on the specifics, but let's not get into too much detail on that. But what we're really talking about is that being able to monitor how that system performs, okay, can give you insight into maybe some ways to adjust it, right? And in the case of one of the edges I'm referring to, when in the environment that I originally developed it for, you really didn't need to be very particular about how you took the profits. And as hedge funds traded it, you had to be more aggressive in taking those profits from that edge. Okay, if that was a generative system, I would have no idea how to do that unless I had categorized it, and that's what we're talking about. So the idea of starting with attention or goal is not just for the garbage in, garbage out addressment concern, but it's also to address this idea of being able to iteratively refine what we're running, iteratively refine the concepts. So I think that's a very we'll see how this works in with my methodology, my process. So always start with a key idea. And this is something I think Jeff Swanson's talked about. It may have came from someone else, I don't know. But I do like it. I was doing that, and I said, but I never really wrote that down as to what I was doing. But I always start my strategy with a key idea, okay? This is the same I would in a manual construction, and just as a little bit of because my audience, I'm assuming you're system developers, you're serious system developers, meaning that you will pursue both manual and potentially generative system development. In my manual strategy construction, I always recommend, I'm assuming most of you are using easy language, maybe C#, but the first line of code, I put a comment in what the intention is I'm trying to achieve. First line, it's always something I do. And another thing I do when I construct my manual strategies is I never delete anything, okay? Other than I'm trying to get it to work, but once I start trying to improve the strategy, I just comment out the line and I add a new line. So I have a full history of what I'm doing. So we're taking that same concept of the key idea. Well, in the system generators, there's usually there may not be any particular point to put that in there. Whereas the code is a kind of a starting point. You can put it in right with the code, first line. So what I'm going to recommend is that you create a template, and this is just one possibility, Notion. Okay, Notion's an online notebook journal software. You could do it with local software like TreePad. There's other different types of programs, but basically, or OneNote. But you want to have a system, and when you start the process, you want to go ahead and create that template in Notion and define that key idea there. Because in a lot of these system builders, there's no place to put that in there. Okay, it's not captured. And the key idea is very much relevant to the edge. Okay, and I really can't emphasize this enough, but it's one of the reasons I didn't want to share any key ideas, because if I share the key idea, and there is an edge with that key idea, then I'm basically giving away edge. Okay, so your key idea is very much relevant to the edge. I want to contrast this way when we look at the traditional way of system development and generative systems, and how these are similar and different. In traditional development, you're essentially using a scientific method to test if the key idea has an edge. Okay, it's a test. Is there value in this key idea? In the generative systems, in my methodology, what we're using generative systems, it's very similar but slightly different. We're trying to find, are there any edges that this key idea that captures this key idea, or are there any edges that fit inside this key idea? Okay, they're kind of similar actually when you think about them. In traditional testing, you're trying to you know, basically, well, you might say scientific method, you're trying to reject the null hypothesis or the disprove whatever. But really, we're really trying to prove, right? We're trying to show that we have an edge. Even though some people say we're trying to show that that you can't prove that you have, you can only reject that you don't have. But what we're talking about is, in traditional development, you're testing if the key idea has an edge. In using generative systems, you want to be able to discover any edges that exist within this concept of the key idea. Okay. And again, this is, when we think about generative systems, you'll say, where's the edge come from? And they'll say, well, it comes from the ability to test build all these systems and generate all these systems. You could also argue that the edge comes from the key idea. Okay, and that's what I'm arguing. One portion comes from the key idea, one portion comes from the testing. Let me talk about a little bit of divergence here, a little bit of tangent, but let's think about some measures, some different types of calculations, some algorithmic calculations on price, right? Some indicators, right? Let's take the moving average, okay? Moving average is one type of indicator. A VWAP, a volume-weighted average, is another type of indicator, right? Another type of calculation. High volume nodes and volume profile methodology is another type of a calculation, right? Based on volume, not price. And the midpoint of a bar's range is another type of calculation. It's a type of a bar calculation. Now, I just mentioned 4 distinct algorithmic calculations, right? If we think about those 4 calculations, they all represent some measure of fair value or centrality, okay? Moving average is a measure of centrality. VWAP is a measure of centrality. High volume node is a measure of centrality or fair value, right? Midpoint is a measure of fair value. If we think about a trading system, when we define our trading system or our concept that we want to test, right, we could say that choosing between any of these 4, unless we have a strong reason, or that choosing any of these between any of these or preferring any of these is basically arbitrary because we don't have information, we don't have evidence, right? And so we could say if these are arbitrary, then what does it matter, right? Which one we choose, or that we should not have a preference. So again, that's something to think about as we think about what were the levels of abstraction, okay? And there are different levels of abstraction, okay? Depending on, you can template an idea in various forms, right? So again, this applies to traditional system development, and I think it should apply to your generative systems. Set your pass-fail standards, okay? So many times, developer will come into a chat, which we highly appreciate, the Discord and the chats where traders will help other traders. But so often, a trader comes in and says, is my system worth trading? And nobody can answer that except for you. That's really, you will be the one to answer if your system is worth trading or not, okay? You are the ultimate judge of that. And so I'm going to encourage you to establish your pass-fail standards before you start. It'll make things much faster, much easier when you get to the point where you're trying to decide this stuff. Now, a simple pass-fail standard is profit factor and number of trades. And these work very well with what I consider to be an edge. And a lot of traders will say edge is expectancy or this or that. But do you really know what edge is? Let me ask you this. Do you really know what edge is? In my interview with the Better System Trader, I suggested what I thought edge was. But if you really know what edge is, then tell me this. Is a strategy that has a profit factor, if you know what edge is, you should be able to tell me which system has a bigger edge. Yes or no? Yes, right? So let's imagine a profit factor of 1.6. A strategy has a profit factor of 1.6 and 30 trades. And another system has a profit factor of 1.5 and 100 trades. Which system has the bigger edge and why? Okay, you know what edge is, so which one has, or are they equal? Well, if you don't know, you probably haven't established what you think what really edge is, right? And I like to think of edge as magnitude of effect and strength of effect, or weight of evidence. There's the magnitude of the effect and the weight of the evidence, and that's a very scientific way of thinking about it. So magnitude is very analogous to your profit factor. And the weight of the evidence is the number of trades. Okay, so that's what edge is for me. So I would say in that case that the system had with the greater number of trades had a stronger edge because the weight was significantly more, while the effect was about the same. Okay, it was only slightly less. And these are things that you need to establish and for yourself, and maybe you have a different idea about what edge is. Right? And the reason we want to establish this is because when it comes to deciding if your system, that you will run a system or not, it's not always going to be so simple. There's going to be cases where there is, again, a slight difference, or maybe your system scores, passes everything except for one metric, and it's very close. It's good to have a clear standard when you're evaluating that. You can say, okay, this system's probably worth passing or not. And let me say this, on this number of trades, 30 trades is the absolute minimum I would consider. I actually would not trade a system with 30 trades. I would not do that unless it had a very, very large profit factor. Okay. So I'm normally looking for 100 trades, but that's just kind of the minimum. And that comes from statistical tests and things where people say 30 is the minimum, based on certain distributions. That's where that comes from. But it's really, there's no right answer, so to speak. But this is stuff that you want to establish before you get, so-called attached to your system that you're developing. Okay. Now, the next part of developing for generative strategies that's very important is defining constraints. Okay, one of the most important factors when you're using a generator is to define your constraints. Constraints further refine, complement, and define your key idea. And the most important constraint is probably the holding time. It's probably the simplest constraint that we can talk about. Okay. So a swing day trading strategy buys at the open and sells at the close. Okay, it's defined as a swing day trading strategy because it does not hold overnight. Okay, of course there are you can have 2-day strategies, 3-day strategies, and my belief is that you don't want to mix everything up. Okay, and again, this goes back to being able to control what the generator is producing to something meaningful, and you don't want to mix everything up because eventually these will be different. You want to be able to track these strategies going forward. You want to know what they're doing. And, these are different strategies, completely different strategies. So I think it's very important to be able to find these constraints that you can bend your strategies into specific classes. Okay? Classes of strategies. Okay. So again, we're talking about classifying your strategy based on the holding period. Of course, you can also classify it based on how it behaves, right? You could do correlations. What you construct here is up to you, but the goal is organization, elimination, and what's going on with these generated strategies. And again, that's why being able to craft and really guide that creative process is so important for me. Because if it's generating strategies that are, if you come back with a generation, it's got strategies that are day trades and strategies that's holding for 3 months. For me personally, that's worthless. Okay, I don't want that. Okay, that's garbage. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the secret sauce and / invariants. And we probably should have talked about validation first. Let's see if we talked about validation next. Okay, we'll talk about next. Okay, so not every strategy needs a secret sauce. Okay, but it can be a good source of edge. Okay. A secret sauce is typically going to be a proprietary or custom indicator that you force the strategy to use. And again, we see now why this is so important in my work, is to be able to force things and to really guide that process, because if I can't do this, generator is not going to be useful for me. Okay, I need to be able to do this. I'm going to say you have to use this because that's how I'm going to. It helps to one, it helps you to test what you're trying to test, but it also helps you to delineate and build different kinds of strategies by enforcing or excluding various secret sauce recipes, right? And again, the invariants are what indicators you choose to include or not, right? They can, an invariant is an indicator that you force to be included, okay? Um, and again, the secret sauce is exactly that, secret sauce. So I'm not sharing secret sauce, but it's going to be typically a custom indicator you develop, maybe a unique source of data, right? It could be a secret sauce. It's anything that you're doing that's unique to that type of strategy, really. We've got to validate the strategy, and this is another thing when we look at handcrafted strategies or classical strategies, or when we're hand coding a strategy. The validation is usually the first step, and interestingly, when you're using a generator, there's no real validation step in the process. One moment. Okay, I'm back. So we're talking about validating the strategy. We're talking about making sure the strategy is doing what you intended. And what's interesting is that there's in these system generators, that validation step, there's not really a process where you do that in most of these generators. It just starts generating strategies, and then you have to look at them and see. So usually, if I'm going to do a long run, I want to do a short run first and make sure that strategy is actually doing what I intended. And many times when you see results that look too good to be true, it's because the system has cheated. The generator has so-called quote-unquote cheated. There are many forms of cheating. These are pitfalls to watch out for, and these are things that, in my opinion, really decrease the validity of the results. So, for example, one example would be you've tried to create a day trading strategy, and you find out that it's buying on the last bar of the day, so that's actually holding overnight. Okay, that's not a day trading strategy in the classical sense. That buys at the open, sells at close. You can also have wrong end time and holding under close. You can have, maybe you set your stop loss to a dollar amount, but it's set to ATR in the program. You're not really getting a stop loss on that. So a lot of times when you see really good results, it's because the strategy generator has something's been defined incorrectly, or something's wrong. Another type of thing I don't like to see is strategies that repeatedly buy in a downtrend without any type of weight or whatever. Some of these types of strategies can look good overall, but could you really trade that? And is that really doing what you think it's doing? So those are some of the things that's important to watch for. And sometimes you'll find you can find actually a source of edge when the strategy, you're trying to do one thing, because these generators are so good, you'll find another source of edge. And you have to determine, well, do I want to use that when it wasn't what I was looking for? And I've found various calendar effect edges when I've been looking at something completely different. So I don't trade calendar effect edges, but I was like, wow, this is real. This is a strong edge, and it relates around the calendar. Okay. So you need to look for those things and see what's really trying to understand that, make sure your strategy is doing what you think it's doing before you spend a lot of time on a long run, build run. Okay. The challenge. Okay. The challenge is something I actually developed in my discretionary process for optimization. And I found I could get very different results by how I posed the challenge. But with discretionary, that's discretionary, that means handcrafted systems, classical systems. But with the challenge has a limited value, even though it has some value. There's a limit to how much you can utilize this type of concept with a handcrafted system. With the generative system, the challenge is much more powerful in the way it can be used and expressed, and it's another huge source of edge. So what is the challenge? So one problem with generators is they generate a lot of mediocre strategies, right? You get a lot of strategies that are mediocre, and you just don't know which one's worth trading. And there's this concept that some strategy developers are utilizing called basically put it in applied terms, a crap folio. This idea of you'll trade a bunch of small little micro edges and somehow be profitable. I don't know if that can work or not. Maybe it can work great. I don't know. But in my own efforts and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build a portfolio of really great systems, right? And that's my goals are completely different from that. So the challenge is something I'm going to put in to the process that's going to make it very difficult for the system generator to be able to generate systems. And it should make it less likely for random strategies to be able to pass. Okay. The challenge is, again, a big part of being able to find a real edge with these generators. You can be formulated in different ways. Now, notice I'm not specifying what the challenge is. And you're probably, as a trader, as a system developer, probably thinking about what the challenge could be. And that's great for you. But this is such a big source of edge, I'm not going to just tell what it is. Okay. And again, the challenge can be different. Okay. But this is an important part in when I use these generators. And of course, most of you probably already know a challenge or a form of a challenge. But again, I'm not giving you that challenge. You're figuring that out for yourself. Okay. And again, this challenge can be formulated again in different ways. There's a couple different challenges I know of. There are primary, but based on the key idea and what you're trying to achieve, you may be able to formulate your challenge in a different way. Okay. But the challenge is, again, something we're going to put in there to make it very difficult for these systems to try to weed out the mediocre systems. Okay. And it's a fun thing because as we try to figure out the challenge, your challenge may be too much, and then you have to say, okay, this is too much. I have to back it down. So this is kind of one of the fun parts about using generators is working on this challenge aspect. It's something that's different, and this is something that really the ability to pass these challenges is something that's unique with generative systems in many cases. Verification, I'm not going to talk too much about verification, we're talking about out-of-sample verification because different generators have different capabilities in terms of verification. They use different methods, and I don't know what method is really best. I don't know. What I will recommend is kind of like the standard way that I will do things is I will keep a portion of data completely blinded by the generator. Keep it completely out of sample. And why? It's because there's a couple different reasons, but one, it goes back to how many results you can look at. By keeping it out of the first phase of development, I'm going to be looking at less of these results out of sample, and so it's going to have a less impact. There's going to be less of a capability for me to go through hundreds or thousands of out of sample results and allow that to influence my decision making. So within the generator, there's always going to be an out of sample, potentially two out of sample portions of data, and then there's going to be a separate out of sample portion from that I will use for the final verification. And this is typical of the ways that I will do it. There may be some exemptions, some exceptions if I think the verification process that works out of sample is equivalent. But this will be the typical way that we'll do that. Okay, so once we've validated, we verified all this stuff, we have some systems that's been generated. The next step in my process will be reverse engineering and boosting methods. So it's not uncommon that I can double or triple performance through this process. I'm running only a single back test or two back tests. Talking about doubling or tripling performance that the generator may have run a day or 2 days on. One back test, I double the performance, and this is not uncommon. Okay, with my boosting methods. And again, the boosting methods, there's probably at least 5 different classes of boosting methods. I need to write those down, but those are all proprietary. And so, again, I can't share those, but it's part of the process. Okay. Finally, we have pipelining into production. You want to get the strategy live. What's your process for that? Obviously, you want to evaluate the live results with what the strategy is supposed to be doing, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Really, there's only 2 ways I think makes sense to do this. Is method 1 is you embargo, you have an embargo period or a silo, or some traders talk about this as incubation. You're basically going to set the strategy aside for a period of time, and then come back to it and evaluate the true sample performance. I often like to go live immediately, and the only way it makes sense to do that is if you can trade very small, whether in equities or you go live with the smallest macros, and you can do that. Okay, and then you can scale up. And the reason I say these are the only methods that make sense is there's no reason to go live with full contracts today, with risking large amounts of money with a strategy that hasn't really proven itself in live trading. And that's my opinion. But why would you need to do that? There's just no reason to. You go live with a micro or small contract, validate it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, evaluate it. So yeah, you can either hold it out of the live for a period of time, or you can go live immediately with a very small size. And one of the benefits of going live immediately is sometimes you'll see you'll identify small errors in your strategies very quickly. As an example of that, NinjaTrader 8 is a backtesting platform, and the backtests on it were perfect except for one little thing. And when I went live, by going live, quickly with the micros and seeing, okay, what's the difference? I seen the one little thing that was doing off, and I was able to correct for that, and it changed the strategy quite a bit. But I was able to be corrected for once I knew how the strategy performed in the live and in the difference. Okay, very small difference. Okay, it was almost perfect, but it wasn't. That's a benefit. You get to see if it's the macros, you could probably do it with risking very little money. And then obviously scaling up at some point. The only risk might not make sense if your market doesn't have a macro or a small contract, but I would never recommend going live with a large contract unless you had to. Why would you do that? Okay, don't make any sense. Now the next phase is multiplying in portfolios, right? You want to be able to multiply your strategies out and build portfolios. And this is a whole other topic with a lot of complexities. It's what I'm not an expert on. I will say I personally doubt that as many traders are running portfolios as it appears in the live, because when you get into actually trying to do it, you'll see that it's not so straightforward. For example, in multi-charts, you have a AA mode versus a synchronized mode. There's no real way of synchronizing your total position count other than by hand. You have to count up each individual position if you're in the AA mode. Of course, you can use multiple sub-accounts if you only run a few strategies. So this is this is not a trivial topic. And it's something I'm not an expert on myself because I'm still learning some of this stuff. So, but that's the end state of the goal. So let's recap. You start with your key idea. You'll establish your pass-fail standards, or this is again my methodology, right? You'll establish your constraints. You'll validate the strategy does what you anticipated or what you think it should be doing. You add your secret sauce if it's relevant, right? And that should be before validation, I guess, if it's defined as having the secret sauce. The challenge you'll establish your challenge, okay? Then you'll verify the results in the out of sample, and then in my process, I do reverse engineering boosting. Okay. If you're interested in learning more about this and you want to go into more detail with examples where I can actually share the edges and things that are more detail, I'll probably have enough content material for 1 to 3 workshops. Actually, the workshops could be different costs depending on the nature of the edge and the information being shared. For the boosting methods, and if I combine them into one, it's probably going to be $2,400, but it could be less for the other workshops. Something going into more detail on this would be less, probably, if we didn't include those last steps. But if you like this presentation, if you enjoyed it, send me an email at curtis@beyondbacktesting.com. That's curtis@beyondbacktesting.com. If there's interest, we'll do the workshop. If not, then I probably won't. But I wanted to thank everyone for giving me your time and watching. And I hope you are able to take away a couple ideas that will help you in your system development. Maybe it's stuff you're already doing, and you're like, wait a minute, I'm doing that, but I didn't call it the challenge. Or maybe I'm doing that, but I didn't call it, didn't call it that. or I didn't write it down, and maybe this will help you. That's my hope and intention, is that this will be valuable. So thank you, and that's all for now. Thanks.